this lesson, we're going to look at how we can define a simple new workflow for an entity. The workflow will allow a user to create a new record and progress the record to the next workflow state. You can see I'm just logging on as the system administrator. In this lesson, we're going to look at how we can create a new primary and transitional rule for that new workflow. To do this, I have to navigate into the administration screen, and from here I go into advanced customization. Now I'm going to create a new version of the opportunity workflow, and in order to do this I have to first of all confirm that workflow is enabled for that entity. So the starting point for me is to go into the workflow and escalation configuration screen, and here I can see that workflow is enabled for the opportunity entity. The next step that I have to go to is to go into advanced customization and into the workflow screen, and it's here I can start thinking about the workflow that I'm going to create. The workflow that I'm going to produce is going to look like this. We're going to start with a starting point which represents the moment in which a record doesn't yet exist. We're going to look at the creation of the record using the primary rule, create opportunity. We'll then look at how we can set up different values within inside that initial record, and we'll move on to the transition whereby new values are set inside the opportunity screen, and I can start the creation of my new workflow. I'm going to give this a name and I'm going to call it custom oppo workflow, and I'll save that. Now the graphical screen that we see in front of us allows us to add in the new structures that make up the workflow. These structures are called states and workflow rules. The states represent the stopping points on the workflow journey. And in my case, we need to create several new states, ones which represent when the new lead or opportunity is created, one that will allow us to indicate that the opportunity has been qualified, and later on inside the workflow process we're going to look at how we can then indicate that the workflow has reached a point where it's either quoted or it's gone into a demo. So quoted and demo will complete this. So we're aiming to produce this graphical chart, and so we've indicated the series of our workflow states, and we have to start constructing the rules that will move us from one state to another. In this lesson we're just going to consider the initial creation of the opportunity and its transition to the next step. So back inside here I have to create a new rule of the type primary rule. Now we want this to govern the initial creation of the opportunity, and so I'm going to call this rule new oppo. Type of rule that it is called a primary rule, and the entity or table that we're doing this rule against is the opportunity. So we can see that we could use a view and we could allow it to select a wide variety of fields, but here I'm just concentrating on the opportunity entity, and I also need to mark this as an enabled rule so it can be included inside the graphical workflow. Other fields inside here that we can see that we can set. We could choose a particular image for our workflow if we wanted to. So we could provide new workflow rules with their own particular icons. We could restrict the access to this particular workflow button. Workflow rules translate into buttons that can be pressed within the interface, and so we can restrict it to a particular team, and we can cause them to be presented in a particular order. The interval is only applicable for workflow rules which are of a type escalation, and we'll cover that in a later lesson. The JavaScript condition is used to further select the exact condition by which the rule is available, and the next lesson in the series will cover JavaScript conditions. So right now I've done enough to initially create my rule, and I can choose Save. I can drag the rule into the graphical workspace, and you can see that it's dropped in here, and then I can drag in the next workflow state. Now at the moment, what we've created here is a workflow that would actually quite happily allow us to carry out some tasks against the system, though it wouldn't be very sophisticated. Now to illustrate that, what I can do is I can activate the workflow, and I can now open up another screen by which I can then go and log on as a different user to show you the new workflow that we've created. So if I navigate to a new company or to an existing company, so I can then start to think about creating an opportunity, we can see our new Oppo button has appeared, and it's appeared as this button on the list because it's of type primary rule. So primary rules are going to cover this initial creation of the entity, and I can select new Oppo, and we can see here that we're certainly starting to enter a new opportunity. But you'll notice that there's no information inside the status field, and this is because we are not at this point carrying out any workflow actions. Now workflow actions are all to do with making sure that we have got different fields displayed, different behaviors displayed, and we can start to see what they are if we edit our existing workflow, the workflow that we're working on. So if I go back into here and I now edit my workflow, I can return back into the new opportunity, and I can start to choose certain fields that I want to be displayed. Now to help me on this, what I'll do is I'll just look at the opportunities that are in existence already. So here on another screen you can see that I have to consider the stage field, the status, the forecast, the certainty, assigned to, team, priority, and close by. So what I want to do here is go through the steps of just adding those fields in here so that they are completely covered by the workflow action. Now the workflow action, these workflow actions are the behavior that the workflow rule can invoke. So when we press the button, these are the things that it will do. You'll need to look at the documentation to learn more about the different action types. For now, I'm just going to use this idea of the set column value to allow me to choose and fix particular values into the system. So I'm going to use set column value, and the first value that I want to do is the stage. So I'm going to use my Oppo stage, and you can see because the workflow rule is associated with the opportunity entity, it's displaying these fields. And the opportunity stage field is a selection list, so it shows me the fields of the selection list. So opportunity stage is lead, and here I can mark this as being a read-only field. We're going to set the value straight away, and I'm going to mark that as my first field. I need to start adding in a new set column value action, and here this has got to be for the status. So I choose the status, and I'll say that's in progress, and again I'm setting this value, so I'll have this as read only and put that as order 2. I can set the next value with set column value to be the forecast value, and this field I'm going to provide a default value of 0 and make this to be a required field and mark that as my third field in the order. So we're going to oblige the user to add in a value. The fourth field that we enter in, set column value again, and in this time we're going to look at the certainty. Now what's here interesting is that we can start to think about what's going to be entered in, and we can think about business rules. Now you can see that there are scripts here, so although I'm going to put in a value of certainty of 5, and I'm going to make this a required field, and I'll even put this on order 4, but I can also put in a business rule here in the onChange script. And so if somebody has chosen a value and made the value greater than 10, I'm going to set the value to be 10. And I choose Save. So we've now got 4 fields set up in here, and I will carry on and add in the new set of information, and this time this is for the assigned user, and this field is going to be on a new line, and the value that I want to put in here is the value of the current user. Now I want to be able to take who is creating this opportunity and add them as the default assigned user, so I can do that by using the idea of these hash symbols. Hash user underscore user ID will take the current user and make that equal to the assigned user ID. We'll see, and there's another way of doing this in a moment. So I'll actually make that a read-only field so we can see that it's automatically assigned to that person, and they are the 5th field that we're entering into the system. The 6th field that we add in is going to be the team field, and in this case the field that we're editing with inside the database is the channel ID, and the channel ID isn't going to be a fixed value here. I want to be able to derive it again from the current user. So I can use the idea of another script, a default value set within the create script. What we have here is the value of the current user going to be set to that, and I'll mark that as my position 6. So I can choose Save, and then the 7th value is going to be priority. So I'll set a value here, and I can set the priority just here to be normal, and I'll make that a read-only field as well, so it can be changed by workflow at a later date. The last field that I'll enter in here, so this should be the target close, and what we're expressing here is an offset in minutes, 9,600 minutes off into the future. We can see that that's going to be several days away into the future. Mark that with the order 8 and choose Save. So if we now save this rule is all available to us. I can activate this workflow again, and now if I go back as my user and look at this process and look at the business of creating a new oppo, what we can see is that we have got the values entered in here, and we can see how time has been offset into the future as well. We can see that values have been picked up, and we can see that the business rule has applied, so that if I mention this to be 15 and tab off, you can see the max value is 10 and the value is reset to be 10. So I have to complete the values that we need to. So I'll say that this is test 1 and choose Save, and we can now see that we have got our workflow set for this record. So we've got the current state is lead. Now this lesson is covering not only the creation of the record, and this record that has been created will have started to have information entered into the tracking, and we can build on that to build our next rule type, which is called a transitional rule. So I've returned back. I'm going to choose Edit Workflow, and in here I'm going to now create for myself another rule. But before I do that, let's edit this particular rule, and then I want to make the whole of the workflow rule available for cloning, so I can use this to speed up the process of subsequent rules. So I save that, and now that I have got that, I can start to create another new rule, which is going to be the idea of the transition rule, taking us on to the qualified stage. My new rule here is going to be the qualify rule, and we are going to clone the new oppo rule. Choose save, and we'll see that qualify has been created, and if we look in this, we'll see that it's actually qualified it and changed it to be a primary rule because it was cloned. But what we can do is now change this to be a transition rule, and we can start to change some of the fields because we don't want them to say set column value necessarily, as we only want them to echo out existing values that have been set in the earlier part of the workflow. So if you change the order here, we can work through these fields quite quickly. Now the opportunity stage is being changed, so if we go into here, we can change this to say that we're moving it up into being qualified, but other values such as status aren't setting the column value. What they're doing is they're choosing to display the field for amendment. And just by changing it, it very quickly saves it back. So we're not having to set the initial value for these. We are simply changing the display field for amendment. Now there are cases like the certainty where we have business rules being expressed, whereby we may want to move this up, say to 15, and change the rules accordingly. So I save that. The assigned user field is going to be altered back to a display field for amendment, and as the same for the channel ID or the team membership and the priority and the close by date. And the last field then is target close. So once we have got this, we can make the rule enabled. So you have to choose that this as an option, otherwise we can't include it within the graphical layout. So I choose save, and I can drag my qualified into here and bring the state down below the qualified option. And once I've done this, I can save and activate the workflow. So this is now a saved workflow. Back inside here, if I refresh my summary screen, we can see there's a qualify button now available to us. And I can in here click on my qualify button, and you can see that it's moving the value to qualified. And if I see that my certainty has increased to 15, but if I change that to say 40%, you can see that the rule has also been changed. And I can put in my tracking note, and I can choose save, and we can see how this is being shown within inside the tracking information as data is being updated. Okay, well, we've looked so far at the idea of the creation of two forms of workflow rule. We've looked at the idea of the primary rule, so with the create oppo, and we've gone ahead and we've looked at the transition rule and the rule qualify oppo. In the next lesson, we'll look at the types of rules of global rule and conditional rule, and in there we'll also look at the idea of creating here the additional tasks and use of conditional behavior.